Hello.
Our story begins inside a place between time and space, a location only accessible to those who trust the Force and are guided by its winds. Ezra Bridger found himself wandering the barren paths of space. It was a world between worlds, one where he could see every event transpire, one where he could sense every change in the winds. He could hear voices past, present, and future, from Kanan to Qui-Gon to Kylo Ren. Every moment was unchanged from when he first stepped in here. Little did the young Jedi realize how much he could change by simply being in this realm. As he came across a portal, he saw Ahsoka fighting Darth Vader. It was a tense standoff, and she was about to lose, but she struck the ground in hopes that the Sith Temple would consume her former master. Ezra threw his hands out. Instead of pulling her, she dipped under the strike and away from the lethal blow. Ahsoka turned towards the portal where the Force had just saved her life. But this fight wasn't over yet. She still had to fend off Vader as the former master and apprentice dropped into the temple to finish their duel. Ezra watched with horror, a moment in time having already come and gone. Did he really change anything though? Ahsoka was moved by his hands. Ezra could hear screaming down the walk, and so he turned and ran, wondering who it was. When he came to the portal, it was bursting with light. A Jedi that he couldn't see was holding a purple lightsaber over his face and stopping lightning from coursing over his body. Ezra watched with interest as the Jedi Master lowered his blade, and Ezra saw who it really was. He wasn't familiar with the man, but the look was described by his master. Kanan spoke very highly of Windu, because they were of the same lineage. Ezra came from a line of some of the most incredible Jedi the Order had to offer: Windu, Balaba, Doom, and now Bridger. He watched the moment unfold in front of his eyes, a moment in time that only 3 individuals in the entire galaxy were aware of, a moment that would define the future of said galaxy. Ezra could see Anakin, recognizing him from one of Ahsoka's holocrons, but something was off. He wasn't caring or empathetic. He was vengeful, here to claim triumph or stop victory. It didn't make sense, but he waited, listening as the conversation unfolded, and at the last second, as if everything happened before ever happening, Ezra, on instinct, reached out his hand, throwing Anakin's lightsaber from his belt and pulling Windu through the portal into his own time. The Jedi Master looked around, wondering where he was, and Ezra told him it was a portal of some sort. Mace grabbed his weapon and asked who Ezra was, and it was explained. Mace turned back to see the moment in time he came from vanish. There were some pleasantries that were discussed for a short while, these revolving around how Ezra knew of Mace and what time this was. As Mace learned, it was 18.5 years after he was killed on Coruscant. The Jedi Master wasn't even sure how he felt about these change of events. He believed all is how the Force wills it, but maybe this was indeed the will of the Force. They didn't have a whole lot of time to talk because Palpatine opened up a dark portal so that he could access the world between worlds by using the Jedi. But upon seeing Mace Windu, Sidious felt confusion, rage, and a sense of dread. Mace wanted to charge the portal, but there was so much about this time that he needed to understand before chasing down the Sith Lord and defeating him. The 2 Jedi would use the Force to defend themselves from Palpatine before making their exit. They'd meet up with Hera, Sabine, Zeb, and Chopper as they escaped the excavation site. Due to the aid from Windu, Ezra would be wide awake until they returned to their base on the far side of the planet. There was so much to discuss, much to teach, much to learn. Mace was in a completely different era, because he came from an era in which the Jedi did not lose the war, an era where the Sith were defeated, and one where the Republic was the dominant force in the galaxy. He knew nothing of the fall of the Order, or the death of Anakin Skywalker, or even the creation of the Galactic Empire. It was explained to him, and aside from the obvious concerns, there were some wonders. For example, General Syndulla was just a little girl when he last saw her. It was when he and the Republic liberated Ryloth. She remembered him. So much had changed, and he didn't know how to really grasp any of it. This wave of confusion, shock, and heartbreak would affect him as the following days transpired. During a small skirmish, Mace would be responsible for the death of Ruck, Thrawn's personal assistant. But Mace would also follow Ezra's plans, the ones that would involve the storming of the Imperial facility over Lothal City, and the liberation that followed it. Also, thanks to Ruck's death, Gregor would be able to survive the Battle of the Dome. Mace would see Ezra, the boy who saved him and his Jedi descendant, go to Thrawn as a true Jedi would. Ezra would be responsible for the destruction of the Imperial fleet and the disappearance of Thrawn, all of which coming at a great sacrifice. Ezra was lost, but in the same fashion as his instructor and his teacher before him, and her teacher before her, The Shatterpoint lineage was one of great sacrifice for the greater good. Before Mace was saved, it was his victory over Sidious that would have saved a galaxy from the Empire. It was Depa's sacrifice that saved Kanan so that he may instruct Ezra, and it was Kanan's sacrifice so that Ezra could save Lothal. And now, it was Ezra's sacrifice, in the long line of a great lineage, one that liberated not just Lothal, but showed the galaxy that this alliance wasn't going to buckle to overwhelming odds. It was a message to the patriarch of the lineage that he should go to great lengths to ensure this galaxy was liberated from the curse of the Sith. Mace would have gone the distance, but seeing the young Ezra Bridger do what many of the great Jedi of his era couldn't, inspired him to represent their order with strength. And for Mace, he believed that he owed Ezra a life debt. He was saved by a descendant of his line. It was only right that he bring him back home. Mace understood the importance of this fight, but he also understood that he was a villainized individual. The galaxy saw him as the reason for the creation of the Empire. The Jedi were painted in an untrue narrative, one that he couldn't undo without time. At the moment, it was important for the Alliance to not worry about relics from the past, such as himself. Their fight was one that required unity, and due to Hera having a child on the way, he didn't want her to worry about anything other than her future infant and the Alliance. He would take the makeshift Phantom and go on a search, one in which he would enlist the help of an infamous Jedi droid, Professor Hyang, an individual who had been with their order for 25,000 years. It takes some tracking, but eventually, after a month or so, Mace would track down the Professor and his T6 shuttle. Mace knew that to get to another galaxy it'd be nearly impossible without some help, and it would be even more difficult to get back home. Due to the lack of budget, they were pretty much out of luck. The only thing they could really do was take a Purrgil there, but they usually went to Peridea so they could die. It was the ancient burial ground of their species, so if the Jedi wanted to get back, they'd have to hop in with a herd of Purrgil that weren't dying a galaxy away, which also meant if they got there, they'd also need to make sure they found Ezra and got back in time to get back to the known galaxy. But there was yet again another issue. There was no guarantee that Ezra and Thrawn went to the location of these Purrgil, being that neither Jedi or droid knew where these herds were going. Mace did have an idea though. While Hyang was busy trying to track these space whales, Windu used Ezra's lightsaber crystal to try and connect with him. It was a very taxing process, but through a series of days and meditation, Mace would be able to connect with Ezra by using his crystal. The connection was weak, much weaker than Dathomiri witch magic would be, but it was just enough for Windu to get enough information from Ezra. This being that Ezra saw the planet come up on the ship's scanners as called as Peridea, and he recalled seeing dead Purrgil before making his escape to the surface and away from the fleet. Before Ezra and Mace lost connection to the Force, he told the Jedi Master he was with a people that called themselves the Nadi. The following events would be very strenuous, but they would involve the Jedi using the Purrgil to get to Peridea, Mace using Ezra's crystal to hone in on his position, grab Ezra while being chased by a bundle of TIE fighters, and then getting into a Purrgil at the last second before jumping back into hyperspace. They didn't know where they'd end up, but after copious of hours of waiting, they'd arrive outside the moon of Atar. During this trip through hyperspace, Mace would catch up with Ezra on all the events that led to him finding him. They'd talk a lot and catch up on things that Mace wasn't familiar with. Professor Hyang had filled Mace in during their trip to Peridea, but Ezra had some more personal anecdotes, especially about Kanan and what Ezra knew of Depa's passing, as well as Order 66, Luminar Unduli, and some other things that Hyang wasn't aware of, one of those being the discovery of Ben Kenobi on Tatooine. These were simply things that they didn't have time to discuss while they were on Lothal. During their trip through hyperspace, during a light-hearted conversation, both Ezra and Mace were hit with a terrible sense of dread, as if millions of voices cried out in fear or terror and then were silenced. Something terrible had happened. When they arrived at the moon of Atar, they had to find their way back to the rebels, and thankfully, Hera gave them the coordinates. Not to mention, Ezra was familiar with where Yavin was. With Mace's life debt semi-complete, he was ready to return to the war effort and aid the rebellion in defeating the Empire. When they got to Yavin, everything had changed. There was a debris field orbiting the planet, and the Jedi were to learn that the Death Star was destroyed by a young pilot, one flying an X-Wing for the very first time. Despite the celebration that followed, there wouldn't be much time for lollygagging around. The Alliance needed to beat it before the Empire returned with a vengeance. In the chaos, Ezra would give his lightsaber back to Sabine, believing that she would find her spark soon enough. Thanks to Ezra's return, the Ghost Crew would be put back together almost entirely. Sabine would also learn what Ezra meant when he told her that he was counting on her. Ezra would craft a new lightsaber for himself, one keeping its emerald tone, simply due to his position in life at the moment. The hilt itself resembled that of his master's. The Alliance would relocate to another place of operations in a hidden location. For the time being, it would be on Crate. Due to its location in the Outer Rim, it was secure. It was one of those many locations the Alliance used that went undiscovered by the Empire. Here on Crate, the Alliance would set up camp and continue their heavy recruitment. The victory over Yavin and the destruction of the Death Star resulted in several new members coming to their aid. These freedom fighters wouldn't be brought straight to Crate. Instead, they would operate in the frontline environments. Mace would be a part of these operations. While he had no intention to break up the Ghost Squad, he believed that there was so much more training Ezra needed. Kanan had done a fine and terrific job, especially because he only received 3 years of informal training due to the war. But someone like Mace could give Ezra the instructions necessary to bring him to his full potential. And while Hera didn't want to lose Ezra, Windu promised, similar to the promises he made to Cham Syndulla during the Clone War, that he would protect Ezra. Hera knew she could trust the Jedi Master, as he never lied to her. Despite Ezra going off with Windu, the bond in the Ghost Crew never changed. Ezra and Mace would search for other freedom fighters and lead them against impure regiments and bases. For stormtroopers, this was nightmarish. Ezra was already an exceptional talent, but they were now facing one of the deadliest Jedi to grace the last 100 years of galactic history. Mace was looking for Sidious, and the Sith Lord sent elite troopers to track him down. Luckily, these elite members of the Imperial military wouldn't ever stand a chance. It'd be during these few months following the Battle of Yavin that Ezra would continue his training with Mace. They learned each other's styles, and Mace very quickly adjusted. While he didn't change his teaching style, he understood that this was a different era, one where survival trumped the Jedi Code, and that was something he believed was necessary. His quick and decisive change in teaching style allowed Ezra to catch up really quickly, and then expand upon his already established talents. As the two Jedi continued their work on the front lines, Mace would begin the rebirth of the Jedi Order. Because he and Ezra didn't stay grounded at Crate, they discover other Jedi lost amongst the stars. While there weren't many, they were there. Among the discovered were Reva and Cal Kestis. Cal had a family with Marin, and Reva was doing as the Jedi had before her, establish the hope for the hopeless in the galaxy. The path for former Jedi was difficult, and those who became Inquisitors either died for something they truly didn't understand, or they fell back into the light. Mace's acquisition of these new allies would be an inspiration for him to be a mentor for more than just Ezra. As he had come to suspect, the pilot from the Battle of Yavin was related to Skywalker, more than related but directly tied to Anakin. Mace didn't know of Vader being Anakin simply because those who knew were dead or Sidious. Ezra wasn't familiar with Anakin enough to recognize that he was Vader. All he knew is Anakin struck Windu at some point prior to Mace being pulled from the moment in time. And Ahsoka never said who he actually was. The information of Vader being Anakin would be revealed to Windu through Reva. This left Mace with a difficult decision: protect and train Skywalker or fear him as the Council of Old did. It would be through his decision to train Luke that he would learn of Leia's equal sensitivity. Not knowing that they were siblings, but knowing that they were almost two halves to a whole was interesting. Mace knew that to instruct these new Jedi, he couldn't ground them. He would give them instructions and allow them to continue on their own respective journeys. They would, for example, commit to 1 or 2 lessons on Crate. Then Leia and Luke would join Han and Chewie for some missions, while Cal and Marin stayed on Crate, and Reva joined Ezra for a mission or whatnot. The scenarios varied consistently, and Mace never stayed put. But it was through these new instructions that a new Jedi Order was born. Ezra and Mace were the closest out of the bunch, mostly because they saved each other, and of course they were the Shatterpoint lineage. This was a really weird time for the former Master of the Jedi Order, but he stuck to himself. He trusted the Force, and he allowed it to be his guide. His focus was on protecting the interests of the Jedi while standing up for the Alliance. He never stayed close to the Alliance forces because Palpatine was actively hunting him. So he sent special units to his recent locations, and he always made an effort to find the Jedi Master who escaped the world between worlds. While Palpatine was now aware of the Skywalker boy, he feared the one Jedi who beat him. Mace was still in his prime. Sidious was 20 years removed from having ever used a lightsaber. He was training tirelessly now to prepare for this encounter, but Windu was like a nightmare to him, someone who never felt too close, but never far away enough for comfort. Mace and Ezra at one point would be visited by the ghost of Ben Kenobi while they were on Crate, a Jedi that would direct them to Dagobah, which is where they went, instead of Huyang's T6. When they arrived, they found an old and decrepit Yoda, one who had given up his hope and became nothing more than a hermit, one consumed by his greatest failure. 900 years worth of lessons sitting bottled up in the bottom of a swamp. It was here, where perhaps for the first time in his life, Mace questioned the Jedi Order and their existence. He learned the truth about Yoda's failures and the survival of Anakin, who was now Darth Vader. There was so much more to unravel, but at the end of everything, it was Mace's fight. Yoda was too old to continue the fight himself. It was on Dagobah where Windu wondered if fighting the Empire was even worth his time. His order was gone, and he was meant to bear the weight of a 20-year-old mistake that was never corrected. Yoda had 20 years to strike down the Emperor, and he hesitated. That hesitation led to complacency, and fear and solitude, one forced by his own doubt. When Mace and Ezra left, it'd be the young Jedi who spoke to Windu. Ezra would inspire Mace, as Hera and Kanan did him at the beginning of his journey with the Ghost Crew. Ezra told Mace that he had won. The betrayal of Anakin wasn't his burden, but that perhaps was the greatest burden of the Jedi, to bear the weight that no one could withstand. After Mace's verbal criticisms towards Yoda, he considered fighting for the Alliance and just doing away with the Jedi Order. But his young student reminded him what the Jedi meant to people. They could be so much more than what they were now. Mace realized once more that the best instructors are always willing to learn from their students. Ezra was a bright young Jedi, and Mace had great pride in his student, in his legacy. Depa, Kanan, and Ezra were the best of their former order, and now it was time to make right of the sacrifices of those who came before them. Their return to the fight and to the Alliance would accompany the arrival of new Jedi, ones brought in by the Skywalker twins, Reva, Cal, and Merrin. The new Jedi prospects included Quinlan, Asajj, Barriss, Lin, Omega, and Grogu. Barriss and Asajj had to air out their own feelings with each other, but many of them had struggled with darkness. Barriss had aged significantly because she was the healer. She guided those running from the Empire and gave over her life force to help others on their journey. Sabine was also learning, but she was Sabine. Mandalorians were stubborn, and she was, well, very stubborn. This new order wasn't made up of high M counts, but people willing to learn, and people willing to help, like Asajj. She wanted no part in the Jedi Order, but she was willing to help. As the Alliance shuffled away from Crate and into the Hoth system, Windu would relocate this new Jedi Order to Deveron at the Temple of Edith. It was still in ruins from the Clone Wars skirmish, but it would suffice. It was a temporary location, a staging ground. Mace wanted to instruct, but every member of this order, aside from Grogu, were adults. So similar to before at Crate, Mace would conduct instructions, giving tips and guidance on how to best use their skills to their advantage, and then the Jedi would go out and do as Jedi did. Some of their missions would be mercy missions, or recon, or assaults. Didn't matter. All the Empire knew is they needed their enforcer to crush the Jedi scum. Without the Inquisitors, it meant Vader was up to the challenge. Sidious was wary of allowing Lord Vader to face off against Windu, but he would take his chances. He was on edge. Similar to how the Empire reacted to Windu, they did with all these other Jedi, but it never got them anywhere. With the Alliance growing, every time the Empire cracked down on a system where the Jedi were, they were hit by unrest. The people didn't bend to the system of oppression, they stood against it. That's what the Jedi meant. They fought their oppressors and they won. Not every time, not even with heavy-handed victories, but they proved a message, one that showed Sidious and Vader that no matter where they went, they would never escape the people, because no matter how large the military or their super weapons, they would never represent more than the collective people of the galaxy. When the Jedi were out on these missions, it would be Professor Huyang who would take care of Grogu, and it would be Windu who snuck down to Mustafar to capture Vader. Windu was here to capture the Dark Lord and drag Sidious here so he could kill him too. Vader was in an unsuspecting spot too. He had just returned from a failed mission to find the rebels. Imperial fleets were mere weeks away from locating Hoth, and Vader couldn't find the Jedi, who turned a local system against the Empire. He was fuming, and the last thing he wanted to deal with was, hey, is that a purple lightsaber? Vader, minutes after leaving his shuttle, after a hard day at work, had a house guest. Windu lunged from the ceiling and slammed his blade down on Vader's weapon, throwing him from his feet. Windu spun the lightsaber around and backed up, telling Vader to surrender. It'd make things a lot easier for the two of them. Vader got to his feet, not saying a word and lunging forward. Mace stepped back, parrying the strikes and playing this out. He knew Skywalker was somewhere within the suit, but how much has Skywalker changed in the last 22 years or so? Mace played it safe, using Shatterpoint to draw off the dark side and maneuver his blade around. He parried and defended, getting a feel for his opponent the same way he did Palpatine. Vader believed this was going to be an easy win for him. He held resentment for someone that only wanted one thing from him: to trust him. Vader got impatient, believing he could dominate this fight easily, and Windu allowed him to control the match. Mace picked apart the fighting style, seeing that it was Form 5. It wasn't nearly as athletic as Anakin's, but it was still the same form. Mace saw the weaknesses. Every strike was one more piece of the puzzle. Vader thought he had Windu on the ropes, but the Jedi Master quickly repositioned himself to dominate the duel. Vader shoved his blade down with all of his strength, and the two interlocked, as Vader told Mace that he would pay. Confusing, but Mace slid his blade around, pulling Vader's wrist and slashing his hip. Windu stepped back, distancing himself. Everything was slow and methodical. He just needed to defeat Vader. He wasn't here to kill him. Vader's rage wanted to rise, but that's how Kenobi beat him twice. Windu caught this, seeing that Anakin didn't get angry or frustrated. Mace slowly moved in, jabbing and pulling back. Vader swung heavily, and Mace met him again, before spinning into an aggressive strike, one knocking Vader off his balance and allowing Windu to sever his legs. Vader dropped to the ground, and Mace swung forward, cutting Vader's wrist off, and taking the lightsaber. He tossed the weapon to Luke and Leia, who dropped down from above. They watched the entire duel without intervening. From here, the plan went forward. Mace contacted the Dark Lord of the Sith, telling him that his student was here, waiting for his master to save him. Sidious snarled, informing Windu that he may have won the battle, but his precious Jedi were very soon to be wiped off the face of the galaxy. Because the Jedi expected a Sith trick, they were prepared when 3 Imperial Star Destroyers dropped out of hyperspace. A rebel task force was prepared, one equipped with Mon Calamari flagships. The only reason the Alliance agreed to this was because General Syndulla led the Blitz. They surprised the Imperials before they could even properly react. Due to the failure to drag cities from Coruscant, the Jedi task force left Mustafar, taking the Ghost and Vader back to the Hidden Territory. Vader was given proper care, but never control over his other limbs. He was basically just a suit of armor sitting around. Though before the Empire located Echo Base, Mace and Vader would have a heart-to-heart. Mace spoke to Anakin the same way he would have had Anakin been transparent all those years before. Windu just wanted to know why he did it. Anakin said the same reason every individual joins the Sith: the promise of power. He wanted to save the person he cared about, and Mace asked if he did. Vader shook his head. Windu told Anakin that he was truly sorry that this happened to him. Whatever was supposed to happen inside of Palpatine's office may have never happened, but Mace expressed that he'd like to think that Anakin came there to support him. It was the first time he ever truly trusted Anakin. Vader didn't have much to say after that. He was there to stop Mace, and perhaps talking things out would have gotten him further than they did in this time. They continued talking, and Mace asked if he ever regret joining the Empire. Vader again didn't really speak. All that could be heard was his breathing apparatus, just silently suffocating away. Mace nodded his head and stood up, telling him that he'd be under the watchful eye of 2 individuals he should have spent a lifetime with. What Anakin didn't understand is that the farm boy and the Princess of Alderaan were his children. He was just confused because Asajj, Luke, and Leia were watching over him, so he thought maybe Skywalker and Ventress, but he didn't really know. Mace and the twins spoke about it, Reva and Yoda being the ones to reveal the truth to him. The twins told Mace that they would make it apparent to their father when they were comfortable who they were, and Mace thought that was totally fair of them to do. With the Empire now hunting for Vader, the Alliance bought themselves another couple months on Hoth, which they'd used to bounce back to Crate, due to total security the system had. The Empire was closing into Hoth, but the Empire was also losing room in the Outer Rim, making Crate pretty much completely undetectable. Under the watchful eye of the rebels, Vader would watch Mace gather the Jedi up, one final gathering before they split up to join separate Alliance fleets as they made their push for the core. Mace had about a month to track cities down, and he did, believing he wasn't detected in doing so. However, he was going in alone. At this point, there wasn't another Jedi that could fight off Sidious. Quinlan, Asajj, Barriss, Cal, and Ezra could hold their own. That's not saying much. Lynn, Luke, Leia, Reva, and Omega would probably last a couple minutes. Not saying much. Sabine and Yoda, no-goes, so that left Mace. also to the point of Luke and Leia, they weren't fully trained at this point, so, But this was something Mace was okay with. These Jedi had the ability to continue training with each other. They were the one united order, one that had each other. With or without him, they'd be alright. All that mattered was that Sidious was dealt with once and for all. This final lesson was started at dusk, one where each of the Jedi trained together, the lightsabers outlining their silhouettes, all of which dancing harmoniously outside the base on Crate. Grogu watched from Professor Hyang's arms, and Vader's mask reflected the dancing blades of an order reborn. Mace led them in one united session, one that didn't just inspire each of them, but inspired an alliance prepared for their real fight against the Empire. These strikes would be simultaneous, along with the fight Mace would have with Palpatine. Luke and Asajj would stay put with a bundle of rebels and Vader. This was a decision on both of their parts. Asajj still had a bone to pick with Vader, and Luke had intentions to speak with his father openly. Mace would go to the fleet over Naboo, which is where His Excellency waited for him. Rebel fleets around the galaxy would be on a prowl for objectives that would lead them to Coruscant. It was a relatively sound plan. The Alliance knew they couldn't compete with the Empire on a galactic level, but a number of coordinated strikes at the same time could be the way to accomplish it. They just didn't have the numbers to compete in fleet-to-fleet combat. Mace was using an Imperial shuttle with new data codes to land on Palpatine's flagship, and the Jedi Master was dressed as a stormtrooper, something he learned from Ezra. Mace infiltrated the Star Destroyer quickly and moved through the halls under cover. He knew he'd find the Sith Lord. He could sense him. He was so close. As Mace got closer to the Emperor's command deck, battles around the galaxy were beginning. It wasn't just space battles, but uprisings led by the new Jedi and by the new rebels. Mace entered the bridge, having now removed his stormtrooper outfit. As he walked in, he looked at Sidious, who stood eerily still, before turning back, similar to how he did that first night he lost the fight to Mace. Palpatine grunted, telling Windu that he waited too long to take his life. Mace grinned, igniting his Jedi weapon and telling Palpatine that his patience would have to wait for an eternity. Sidious ignited two lightsabers and lunged across the room. Mace stepped back, feeling this out as he had before. Palpatine wasn't as careful as he was the last time. He was actively trying to win this fight. For Mace, he had to act much quicker than he did with Vader, and much faster than he did with Sidious before, which was for him like 3 years before this. He spun his blade rapidly, fending off each strike from the lightsabers. Windu was so preoccupied he didn't hear Palpatine's Royal Guard preparing their staves and striking at him. Mace felt electricity wash over his back as he held his blade out in front of him, defending him from a nearly fatal strike, and Mace fell to his knees, as he turned back and threw the Royal Guards into the back of the wall and turned to be grazed in the face by Sidious's lightsaber. Mace held a hand over his cheek where he was cut. He looked up at Sidious, who stood over him, prepared to strike him down. Mace told his liege that he couldn't even properly win a battle without assistance. The Sith of old would have frowned upon him for his pathetic lack of strength. Sidious drove his lightsaber forward and Mace shoved his hand away from his face and scrunched his face up as he used all of his strength to keep the blade away from landing. Sidious looked down in fear as Mace looked up, telling him that the light would always persevere. Mace shoved back and swung his lightsaber up, cutting Palpatine across his robes and watching the Sith Lord fall to his knees. Palpatine's blades dropped to the ground and he held his face, seeing nothing but white. Mace looked over to the other Imperials as they fled the room, and Mace tilted his blade below Palpatine's chin, telling him that this was the end. The Sith Lord moved the strike, but it got him nowhere. He couldn't see anything, so he rose from the ground and was met with a blow to the jaw. Before Mace could land a strike, he could sense Palpatine's essence leaving. Mace didn't understand, but he stepped back and looked around. The other vessels in the fleet were targeting his ship. This was set up. Palpatine smiled and told Mace that the Sith would forever outlive the Jedi of old. Mace, instead of giving in, ran. The Imperial destroyer unloaded all their firepower into a ship with no shields. Mace ran through the corridors as they exploded around him. He knew that the Imperials had evacuated, so he had to try his luck with something a little different. Luckily for him, the Imperials refused to take Palpatine's ship just in case he survived. No one ever understood essence transfer or what it meant, so they kept it for their Emperor in case he needed to escape. Mace would use that ship to get away, one that the Empire thought Palpatine was in until it abandoned Naboo and jumped to hyperspace. As Mace did this, Palpatine's body dropped to the ground and his essence transferred to Exegol, where he would be too early, finding a body that wouldn't sustain life, and needed to be propped up on a medical spike to survive. Palpatine would live until his son went and pulled the plug on him. Palpatine kept Dathan around so that he could go out and produce an offspring, hopefully one with his own powers, but Sidious would never live to find out. While Palpatine was trying to find himself a means to survive before his son cut the power on him, the galaxy changed. The Empire didn't collapse, it was far too vast for that, but these unified strikes hit the Empire hard, especially when it was confirmed that Palpatine was killed over Naboo by his own forces. The morale in the Empire was low, but they had one hope, the second of 3 Death Stars. Mace was relieved to survive the encounter with Sidious, but he knew something felt off. He asked Vader about it when he returned the crate. Anakin wasn't coming back around, but Asajj gave him an earful, which he didn't appreciate, and Luke kind of brought him back down. Good cop, bad cop style, except it wasn't intentional nor rehearsed. It was the shifting of the guard, and Asajj had to go first. Vader was willing to speak about it, but he didn't really know. What he did know is that the Eye of Webbish Bog on Mustafar had secrets of the Sith. Mace patted Vader's shoulder and thanked him before leaving. He would reunite with Cal and Reva before going to Mustafar to collect what he would discover was a Sith Wayfinder. All the while, his other Jedi would be out aiding the rebels gather allies for another push of the core, this time being an undercover mission at Kuat, one aided by the Mandalorians of Clan Ren. It was a joint operation to delay the completion of 2 superstar destroyers, and it would stop a number of important supplies from being sent to the Endor sector. As Alliance forces under the leadership of Commander Ren, Lin, Quinlan, and Omega struck at the largest Imperial shipyard in the galaxy, Mace, Cal, and Reva would make their way across the galaxy in Huyang's T6 shuttle, while using a Sith Wayfinder to get the Hexagon. When they arrived, they found a complete desolate landscape. With Sidious gone and Vader teetering away from the Sith path, similar to how Dooku did, their religion was left to perish. The Sith Eternal were gone, their shops, laboratories, and shipyards were barren. The 3 Jedi wandered into the desolate lands. Reva and Cal hadn't felt such darkness since Order 66, a darkness, aside from the Empire, that Mace had never felt before. They eventually found Sidious's dead body, limp and detached from a crane. The life support was pulled out. Mace noted that it was done intentionally, and the Jedi scoured the facilities, eventually finding the heir to an evil throne that no longer stood, a child that, like the clones from Kamino, had no Force sensitivity. Only extremely rare cases produced Force-sensitive beings, and Dathan Palpatine was not one of them. They brought the boy with them back to Crate, and then allowed him to go off on his own, though he would be protected by the Jedi in case he ever had himself a child of the Force. The war for the galaxy would stretch on longer than it would have had Palpatine survived his encounter with Windu. Without Palpatine's overconfidence, the Empire would have attempted to win every battle without playing mind games with Jedi and Sith. They were set on maintaining the Empire, which brought public support back into their hands. This also meant that the war itself became a galactic grudge match, one that used the Jedi as signs that the galaxy was at war because of their return, and another that claimed the Jedi were a part of the oppressed and they desired to liberate the galaxy from said oppression. The new Jedi Order of Mace, Quinlan, Barriss, Asajj, Lin, Omega, Sabine, Reva, Ezra, Cal, Luke, and Leia would be pivotal to this fight. Mace's instruction of these Jedi would mirror what it did to Depa. It would advance them in their Jedi careers with delicate acceleration. They didn't become good because they were rushed. They became good because Windu brought out the best in them. Vader remained a prisoner, but his loyalties would shift from the Empire to the Rebellion. This wouldn't mean anything. He was a prisoner, and that was final, at least from Alliance command. The Alliance didn't like the idea of him getting a fair trial, regardless of his loyalties. The Jedi were to forgive, which was the hardest for Reva and Cal specifically, but the rebels were not as forgiving. Vader was a war criminal. He turned a convention into a checklist, and he did that without hesitation. Those were not forgivable offenses to the public, so as the war prolonged and Anakin returned from being Vader, Luke was especially worried about the fate of his father. Leia had a lot to get past, and she truthfully wasn't sure if she would or not. But it was Mace who taught these young minds to do as Luke was able to do, forgive. The scars would always remain, but Jedi must rise above. It was difficult, but that was their purpose. The war with the Empire really helped these struggling Jedi with forgiving Vader. It wasn't automatic, but it allowed them time to handle their past traumas. The war would conclude after another 3 years of combat, and would come crashing down and end over Chandrilia. The Empire by that point had lost Coruscant, and so they took control over the homeworld of Alliance leader Mon Mothma. They hoped it would prevent her from attacking, but she throughout her entire service to the Alliance sacrificed everything to save the galaxy. Mothma would be the one to accept the final surrender treaty from the remnants of the Empire. Due to the Empire not having their leader and falling back onto their contingency orders early, they were left with Moffs bickering for control, turning a unified front into chaos. The Shadow Council was ripped apart by infighting, and hope for saving Thrawn was lost with Morgan Elsbeth and her wishes to save a crumbling empire. With the aid of the Jedi Order, the Alliance would move to control major systems in the galaxy and demilitarize. But with the Jedi Master who lived during the era of the Clone War, he suggested that they demilitarize after generations, not within the first decade. The reach of the Empire was galactic. The New Republic that was to come would need a standing military, one that he informed their council would have the backing of the new Jedi Order. New Chancellor Mon Mothma would take this advice, and it would be the Jedi support that'd keep the New Republic from demilitarizing. But Mace wasn't going to allow his order to get swept into the political arena again. Yoda died a year previously, and Mace believed it was time for real change. The Order moved to Tython to complete their journey. Despite Vader's loyalty shifting to the Alliance, the New Republic would not be forgiving. Alderaan may have been Tarkin's order, but Vader stood by and let it happen. That was just as bad as doing it. Luke would feel resentment for the New Republic, but his sister would encourage that those feelings be put away. The twins' relationship with each other would be the key to reconciling with the fate of their father, understanding why it was done and coming to terms with the reasons it was done. Mace's order would remain in training for the coming years, growing in unison with the New Republic. It would be Mace who encouraged Ezra to continue the legacy and pass on his knowledge to Jacen Syndulla, regardless of him becoming a Jedi or not. Mace realized how important it was for their order to form around new morals and a new code. Without this new code, this Jedi Order wouldn't survive. It would take decades to see change, and with their Grand Master in his mid-50s, he'd be around long enough to instruct the next generation on how to prolong their existence. It'd be thanks to Windu that the Order would continue on further, and with an entire new generation of Jedi in their midlife by the time Mace passed away, the security of the future Order was maintained. It would be poetic in a way, how both the Republic and the Jedi fell, and how at the end of everything, it would be both rising up together in a new era without the scourge of the Sith and the oppression of the Empire. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Jango Fett Clone, Nick5098, M, INTJ Recluse, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tib, CC2024, Galva Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore Sir 1767, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewu670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny Nguyen, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, 3D Gamer, Lord Calig, Young Lisa 66, Man Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Fortis Lexi Star Wars, Airbus, Rex the Wolf, Matthew First Names, Darkseid46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. Otherwise, check out the Patreon, cool things on there. Otherwise, let's talk about this story. I wanted a partial highlight to be on the Shatterpoint lineage. I think it's a really cool lineage. I think it's probably one of my favorite personally. But I thought the connection between Mace and Ezra would be really interesting. Mace is definitely a lot more stern than Ezra is, but I think the only reason it would work is because this is a different era. Obviously, in a scenario that Mace is training Ezra in the Clone Wars, it'd be the other way around, where Ezra would conform to the stern behavior of Windu. As for Ahsoka, it's trading a life for a life. I don't think she'd beat Vader even if she fell down the hole with him and didn't get cut down by him, as she, I think, did in the original timeline. And so I think that allows Mace to be the focus of the era, while also kind of showing how he would interact with it, because it'd be very confusing for him. But anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.